and thanks for joining us. And thanks for joining us for our state budget webinar. Over the next 90 minutes, CSBA staff and guests will break down the state budget from an education perspective and respond to some of the questions that our members have about how the education portion of the budget is going to impact TK-12 schools over the next 12 months and the years to come. Before we get to the heart of our presentation, let's move forward and look at how you can contribute and ask questions of today's panelists. I ask that you wait and reserve your questions until the end of the presentation. I'm sure you'll have questions throughout, but for efficiency's sake, it's best if we try and contain those questions during the Q&A session, which will be approximately the last 30 minutes of today's webinar. Use the Q&A feature, which for most of you will be at the bottom of your screen to type your questions. Those are the two speaker box in the icon at the bottom of the screen. And do not use the chat as the source for asking questions. CSBA staff will be monitoring the Q&A segment as we go throughout the webinar, and occasionally they will pop into the chat and answer questions there directly via text. But again, most of the questions will be answered verbally at the end of the webinar. And tomorrow you will receive both a recording of this webinar as well as a copy of the presentation deck that our panelists use. We get this question a lot during the webinar, so I'm just going to repeat that we will send out both the recording of this presentation as well as the deck that our panelists are using. And speaking of those panelists, let's introduce them now. We'll start today's presentation with introductory remarks from our CEO and Executive Director, Vernon Billy. Covering the budget overview are our GR team, starting with our head, our Chief of Governmental Relations, Patrick O'Donnell, our Legislative Director, Chris Reefe, Erika Hoffman, who is Deputy Legislative Director for State and Federal Programs, and Carlos Machado and Dan Merwin, our Legislative Advocates. I'm Troy Flint, Chief of Communications at CSBA, and I'll be your moderator today. With no further ado, I give you our CEO and Executive Director, Vernon M. Billy.
Thank you, Troy, and welcome everyone to our state budget presentation. Before I jump into my remarks, I just want to acknowledge the devastating wildfires that are occurring around our state and impacting board members and students and communities in Southern California. And we know that in other areas of the state, many of you are also preparing and on alert for wildfires in your area as well. So I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that and let everybody know that all of us here at CSBA have thoughts and prayers and support are with you during this difficult time. So with that, let me just turn to the budget. I'm going to be very brief because we've got an excellent panel here today, as Troy has already outlined. I think what I want to share with you, I think there's some good things in the governor's budget. First, based on what we can see in our initial look, no significant cuts to education, as we all were grappling with the state's fiscal situation from last year. Obviously, that was an ongoing concern even after the budget was resolved, that we might be facing cuts again coming into this year. But it looks good. So we think that that's great. In addition, the fact that the governor is fully funding the COLA. That's something that CSBA has been advocating for and continues to advocate for. So we're happy to see that. I think one of the other things that I just want to mention, and there are a whole host of them, and we're going to get into it, but we continue to push on the state to prioritize adding money to the LCFF base to the extent that there are discretionary dollars, that is a good place to put those dollars. I think another point or advocacy point for us has been to uphold the constitutionality of Proposition 98. I think, as many of you know, we had to file a lawsuit against the state because we believe that the governor and the legislature violated the Constitution in a manipulation of Prop 98. So we are still pursuing that lawsuit, and so we'll keep you posted about that as well. And speaking of that, we do have some concerns based on our initial look that the governor may be attempting to manipulate Prop 98 again. So our panelists will talk a little bit more about that here shortly, but I did want to raise that again, specifically because, as you may recall last year, that was part of the basis of our concern, was that if we allow the state to manipulate 98 at one point, they'll continue to come back to try and do it, to the point where Proposition 98 loses all of its meaning, despite the fact that it's a constitutional amendment. It's in our Constitution, and it was approved by the voters. So that's why we keep a really close eye on these things when the governor introduces his budget. And again, our initial look, it seems like he might be trying to do it again. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well today. And the last thing I want to mention in the context of the overall budget, which continues to be a priority for us, is how are students performing? And what is the state doing to support you locally to advance student success at the local level and to help close achievement gaps? So that is going to also be something that we're going to continue to talk about and continue to look at, specifically as we look at all the different budget proposals from this year. So with that, I will wrap up. And again, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Vernon. So let's get into this year's proposed budget. Remember, at this point, it's proposed. The governor writes up his budget, hands it over to the legislature, and then it goes through a process. Ultimately, an agreement is typically made at the end, and the governor signs that budget, maybe with a few vetoes, maybe not. But again, this is just the start of about a 5-month process, give or take. The state budget, of course, the senior policy document of the year produced by the state legislature in concert with the governor. And it's a lot of numbers, but it's also a lot of words. And so what we do here at CSBA is certainly we take a look at those numbers. We're going to be talking a lot about the numbers today, but we also take a look at the language. Okay, the words that are typically in trailer bills that implement the budget, or maybe implement something that have happened in the past. It could be a law, it could be a budgetary matter, but those are things we watch very closely at CSBA. So let's not just pay attention to the numbers, let's also pay attention to the words. But what a difference a year makes. Last year at this point, everybody was in shock. The state was facing a $37 billion deficit. It's a much better picture this year, I'm happy to say. In December, the LAO projected that the state budget would be roughly balanced. So that's a very good thing. And it was really the action, as you see that bullet there, the actions taken last year by the state legislature and the governor that helped eliminate the budget deficit for now, because I'm confident there are rough waters ahead on the budgetary front. Revenues are up, and the governor preached caution, as there are a variety of variables impacting the budget. It could be at the federal level, they could be economically, there could be some other factors that impact the budget ultimately as well. The operational deficit is expected to grow in 26, 27 and beyond, especially on the non-98 side of the budget. Those programs are growing at a pretty good rate every year. To our next slide. Okay, by the numbers, the overall state budget is $322.2 billion. It includes all federal, state, and special funding. So the total budget figure there is $322 billion. The general fund share is about $228.9 billion of the total state budget. The overall reserve amount is at $16.9 billion. This includes, and this is important, $1.5 for the Proposition 98 rainy day reserve. So there's still money in the rainy day reserve, despite the dip that they took into it last year. State revenues are up pretty significantly, more than predicted. They're at $16.5 billion, such that the proposed January budget will reflect a $363 million surplus. Not a lot when you take into account that revenues are up that much. Okay, let's talk about the state general fund reserve reform. The governor wants to reform our required reserves. You remember several years ago, we went before the voters, and the voters changed the reserve requirements. There actually really weren't reserve requirements prior to that change that the voters made. But what the governor wants to do is up the reserve allocations, the mandated reserve allocations. He has to go before the voters to do that. He wants a larger bucket of money set aside in times of when there isn't a lot of dollars. And that's reflective of the fact that the California state budget is very buoyant. It's like a yo-yo, I always say. It goes up faster and down faster than other governmental budgets because of the way it's built. It's very progressive in nature. Okay, so what the governor wants to do is double the size of the state's general fund reserve from 10 to 20%. Okay, he wants to exempt reserve deposits from being counted as expenditures. That's because of the GAN initiative was passed some time ago. He wants to make some changes to that so that we can actually put more money away. Okay, again, it will require a state initiative and voters to adopt those changes. Okay, and the Department of Finance has clarified that the governor wishes to not touch the Prop 98 reserve. Now, I can assure you, we're going to be watching this venture very closely to make sure that it does not impact Proposition 98 in any way. Okay, there are clouds ahead for sure. Okay, the impacts of the incoming federal administration, could they cut federal funding to education or other places that might impact the general fund as well? Absolutely, they could. Okay, they stated they wish to do so. So this could ultimately impact Proposition 98 as well and overall state funding. Okay, and then again, there's the volatile nature of the state's revenue structure. 50%, listen to this, 50% of state income tax revenues come from the top 1% of income earners. So we have a very progressive tax structure in the state of California. Again, such that we're reliant on not too many people to produce 50% of our tax revenues in our state. Okay, and then again, there's impact of natural disasters. I don't need to explain those to you. They're going on right now. How could those ultimately impact state revenues and also student enrollment? Okay, that's students not coming to school, students moving away, not being able to attend the school they attended prior, some of the schools being damaged, wiped out, et cetera. So all those are factors that play into education funding.
Now we're going to get into Proposition 98 and the overall amounts here in Prop 98. And I'm going to ask and take this opportunity to introduce our newest legislative advocate, Dan Merwin, who has recently joined us to take over and do this slide for us.
Thank you, Chris. So as some of you may be aware, the budget actually looks at a 3-year period. So part of the governor's budget is revising past revenue estimates, past Prop 98 levels. So this budget is actually looking at fiscal year 22-23, 24-25, sorry, 23-24, 24-25, and 25-26. Collectively, the governor's budget includes an increase or projects an increase of funding of $7.5 billion for Prop 98 over that 3-year span. And we've gone through and we've itemized for each individual year the total Prop 98 amount of funding that will be available, as well as if it's a Test 2 funding year or a Test 1 funding year, which is when it's the funding is based on the share of general fund, generally 39.6%. As you see here in 23-24, the amount is $98.5 billion. It's a Test 2 year that is suspended. That is something that we'll cover when we get a little bit further on. In 24-25, it's now up to $119.2 billion. That's a Test 1 year. And then in 25-26, it's $118.9 billion, also a Test 1 year. So circling back to that suspension, last year during the budget process, Prop 98 was suspended by $8.3 billion. This was funding that just was withheld out of Prop 98. It's a constitutional provision that allows this, but there's a eventual payment that needs to be made. That suspension is tweaked slightly at governor's budget. It's actually revised down $400 million to $7.9 billion. There is also an increase in the general fund revenues, revises the repayment of that suspended amount, that $7.9 billion to $5.6. So that leaves what is known as a maintenance factor, and that balance is $2.9 billion that will need to be repaid in future years per a formula that's outlined in statute. Now, there is one maneuver in this, and I'd like to turn it back over to Chris for a moment to discuss what that is.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. So, we have some good news and bad news when it comes to the overall perspective on public education funding. So I'll touch on a little bit of good news here. In terms of the good news, as some of you might recall, And as Dan talked about, we had a little bit of a dark budget last year, right? A lot of those early actions that also Patrick had talked about helped to balance the budget. But part of that effort was also to do a number of deferrals, year-over-year deferrals. Some of those deferrals were immediately paid back, but there was still one remaining, one to the tune of about $246 million that we're going to see in terms of that would carry over from this year and into the coming fiscal year. Because of the better budget situation we're in, we were very, very pleased to see the governor and the Department of Finance propose eliminating that last deferral. That's always very welcome. And so we're happy to see that. That's good news. That was something that CSBA was advocating for in the case that additional one-time monies came available. However, we do see something that does cause us concern. And as Vernon had referenced, in his introductory remarks, this is causing us some concern, and we're going to be paying very close attention to this. So we are reviewing what this is at the moment. We can't say whether or not it may or may not be unconstitutional. There is some perspective that it might. There's some perspective that it might not be fulfilling the intent and purpose and spirit of Proposition 98. And that is, what is happening is that in the current year, where the guarantee is estimated to be $119.2 billion, the governor is proposing to hold back $1.6 billion that would basically be held in case, because of our volatile revenue structure and because of there's a lot of uncertainties that are happening at the federal level and also with our natural disasters, that 1.6 billion may or may not come to fruition. And so in this regard, that doesn't really reflect what the true calculation of Prop 98 is, however. And so what could happen is, if this 1.6 billion does come to be, then the withholding of that allocation will not be something that districts will see right away. It will be something that will be settled up, if you will, as when the state reconciles the current fiscal year, which won't happen until 2026. And so that is a challenge, and that's something that we'll be monitoring. That 1.6 billion is significant. And to Vernon's point, we do not want to see any effort to undermine Prop 98 in any form or fashion, because what that does is it sets a policy precedent, right? It creates a roadmap that the legislature and others could follow, and they could do it again. And so Prop 98 is set and enshrined in the state constitution. And so this will be something that we will very much will closely at to be able to protect and to ensure that all of public education receives the funding that is entitled to under Prop 98 and the Constitution. So next, I'm going to pop it back over to Dan for the reserve.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris mentioned, last year was kind of a dark budget year. As Patrick mentioned, part of the solutions we faced to last year's budget problem was actually dipping into the Prop 98 reserve. And last year, they withdrew everything. So we had a reserve balance of 0. That was then increased slightly at the end of the budget year with a $1.1 billion discretionary deposit. It wasn't required under the statutory formulas, but that was made to start building some reserves towards the future. The revised revenue numbers that were included in this governor's budget actually changed that discretionary to a mandatory deposit for both 24-25 and then another one in this budget year of 25-26. Overall, the reserve balance, if everything goes through exactly as the governor is currently projecting, would be $1.5 billion. Now, importantly, this $1.5 billion is not enough to trigger the district reserve cap again. That's still well below that threshold, so that local reserve cap is not triggered. Moving on to COLA. For LCFF, it's a 2.43% statutory COLA. This is going to result in about $2.5 billion for LCFF. And then additionally, for county offices of education, it'll be about $12.2 million ongoing to fund the COLA as well as changes in ADA. Now that COLA is extended beyond just LCFF. It does also apply to categorical programs. That includes the LCFF Equity Multiplier, special education, nutrition, state preschool, youth and foster care, the Mandates Block Grant, adults and correctional facilities, charter school facilities, and then the American Indian Education Centers and Childhood Education Program. So with that, to go through some of these proposals in details, I'm first going to turn it over to Carlos.
Thanks, Dan. Can we go to, there we go, thank you. So wanted to talk about two grants programs here that are augmented and created under the proposal. The first one is augmentation to an existing program, the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, which provides funding to county offices of education, school districts, and charter schools to be used for learning recovery initiatives through the 27-28 school year. It looks like that's going to still be the target year that the program will continue through under the governor's proposed budget. Under the existing program, it authorizes supports for academic learning recovery and staff and pupil for staff and pupils' social and emotional well-being. The current funding is allocated on a per unit basis. It's based upon LEA's 2021-22 fiscal year second period reporting for K through 12 ADA, and that's multiplied by the LEA's 2021-22 unduplicated pupil percentage. The funds can currently be used for a number of items, including increasing the number of instructional days and minutes, providing summer school, and there's a number of other areas that can be addressed with those funds. So, and then moving on to the second new discretionary block grant, the administration has characterized this new grant as fully discretionary. Department of Finance likens it to the structure of the grant that's currently available through the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials grant. The state will set priorities for the expenditure of these grant funds. Those priorities are listed in this slide. They specifically, and the ones specifically related to English language arts and development and the mathematics are also areas that will receive sharper focus in other parts of the budget that we'll touch upon in the next slide. But the devil's in the details, so we're waiting to see how these programs are spelled out in budget trailer bill language, which should be available in the first week of March. Next slide, please. So at the top of the presentation, Vernon mentioned that we're going to be looking at specifically what the governor's proposing related to student achievement. So there are some items that are related to that. The first that I want to touch upon is in the areas of literacy and math. There is a proposal here that would provide more resources to be poured into curriculum area coaches. Specifically, the budget includes $500 million in first-time funds, one-time funds to expand the existing literacy coaches and reading specialist grant program to include support from mathematics coaches. As noted here, the current literacy program provides focused interventions for high poverty schools, including resources to train and hire literacy and reading specialists and one-to-one and small group tutoring. For the current program, eligibility for the grants is based upon elementary school sites operated by an LEA with an unduplicated pupil percentage of 97% or greater for pupils enrolled in K through 3 based upon the 2021-22 fall 1 census. And then under the existing program, no eligible school site receives less than $450,000. And then on the next item, there's $500 million. If you go back to there you go. Thanks. There's $500 million to create a literacy network, which will be embedded within the statewide system of support. And this will encourage access to state-developed resources and best practices of high-performing districts. and then also provide targeted support for LAs with persistent challenges in this area. And then regarding multilingual learners, there's $10 million to support multilingual learning in TK by funding the statewide use of language proficiency screeners. And then lastly here, there's English language arts instructional materials that will be developed under the process through the Instructional Quality Commission. And again, more details we'll share more details as the trailer bill language is available. Next slide, please. And in the area of curriculum, the budget proposes an evaluation of the process it uses to develop and adopt standards, frameworks, and instructional materials. A $100 million one-time allocation is proposed to come up with recommendations that will lead to a process that is more streamlined. There's also implementation of the new math framework, which is prioritized as one of the 4 priority areas through the discretionary block grants. Related teacher professional development would be authorized use of these funds. And then lastly, we did want to bring your attention that on an item that's not included in this budget, and that's important because under existing law, there's a requirement that LEAs offer at least a 1-semester ethnic studies course by the 2025-26 school year. However, that requirement is conditioned upon an appropriation, which has not been made to date. And this proposed budget does not include one yet again. So given the little time before the next academic year, we'll continue to advocate for a timeline that gives LEAs sufficient time to develop and offer a course that makes sense and does not put unnecessary burdens on you and other districts throughout the state. So now I'll pass it over to Erika for special ed.
Hello. Special education. The governor's proposed budget for this year does not include any sort of specific increase for rates, things of that nature. However, he does propose the full COLA, the 2.43% COLA, and there will be funding available for increased enrollment and things of that nature. The one thing the governor does do in this budget, as you know, a couple of years ago, he signed legislation that provided for screening, basically literacy screening to identify students with reading difficulties. He'd originally last year included $25 million in one-time funds to train teachers and others on how to use the screening instruments. This year, he's proposing an additional $40 million in one-time funds to purchase various screening materials that have been approved by the state board, and then to further provide training and support for those literacy screenings. And then finally, for special education, and this has been kind of a couple of year ongoing issue, but the Department of Education has undertaken digitizing basically the IEP template and being able to translate that digitally into multiple languages. And so the budget does provide $2 million in one-time funding to further support that activity, so that hopefully we will very soon have IEP templates that are available online for all districts to use, and then have the ability for those to be translated rather quickly into multiple languages. So that's kind of covers special education. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
So we did see quite some continued effort to reinvest additional dollars into our teacher recruitment retention programs. As some of you might recall, and during the midst of the pandemic, the governor and the state legislature adopted a budget that included $5 billion in ongoing funding, or I should say $5 billion in one-time fundings, but over 5 years to increase and enhance various programs that help to recruit and retain teachers. So, we are now almost 5 years out from those dollars, and so those dollars are beginning to expire. One of the more successful programs that we saw drawn upon was called the Golden State Teacher Program, which provided $10,000 grants per year for 2 years to candidates in teacher credentialing programs. So the governor's proposed extending that that program with an infusion of additional $50 million to help keep the program running. That has been a very popular program, and also to help address the sheer workforce shortages that we're facing across the state. Also, welcome is a $150 million proposal for a new teacher recruitment and incentive program. That is basically all the details we have at the moment. We're still waiting to see the full details on what that means in relation to the budget. This will come out when we see the trailer bill language, hopefully released in early February. But there was in prior year about $900,000 that was going to be allocated to the CTC to do, kind of promote positive advertising and recruitment, and kind of instilling the values and benefits of the profession. And so we might see that in line with this particular effort in terms of helping to attract more folks and more candidates into the teacher certification pipeline. And then the National Board Certification Incentive Program, another program that was created during that investment of $5 billion back in 21-22. This will provide an additional $100 million to extend the timeline to allow existing teachers who have applied for and continue to show interest in the National Board Certification Program to continue to do so. We also saw some proposals around and extended proposals around the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, or ELOP for short. For those of you who might recall, this was something that was also created during the midst of the pandemic. It is a commitment of a substantial amount of ongoing Prop 98 funds to essentially provide services and programs that help to address the lost learning opportunities that students faced during the pandemic. The program was built out fairly quickly. It was instituted and allocated $4 billion almost immediately within the first 18 months. 18 to 24 months of the program. The money comes out as an apportionment based upon your UPP counts. The proposals in the budget expand the reach of this program with some additional money. So this will actually increase the population of students that you will need to inform about the availability of the ELOP program and to allow into the enrollment of the program. Additionally, to try to address this increased enrollment in the program, the January's budget proposes an additional $435 million for this expansion, bringing the ongoing amount for ELOP to $4.4 billion ongoing of Prop 98 dollars. In the world of universal transitional kindergarten and state preschool, what is very much welcome is that we're seeing an effort to rebench, if you will. And remember, rebenching is where the state is investing additional dollars on top of the prior year guarantee to increase the level of the guarantee. So we call it rebenching, to the tune of $900 million to reflect the fourth and final year of UTK implementation. And so again, this is welcome news, because when you ever have this significant amount of enrollment growth and the expansion of an entire grade year, we want to make sure that there is enough butter to spread over the Prop 98 toast. And so we're thankful to have that. However, that does not mean that UTK is not without its challenges. As many of you know, over this implementation, we have not seen a lot of funding being proposed for things like facilities, additional teacher recruitment, and the second adult in that classroom. There is money that is proposed in this year's budget to help address that, but that also is paired with, again, the intent to lower the adult to student ratio in TK classrooms from 1 to 12 to 1 to 10 in the coming school year. So that is likely to be triggered unless things change. But for the time being, you just want to make sure all districts are aware that the TK classroom ratios will be dropping to from 12 to 1 to 10 to 1 in the coming school year. Again, like I said, there is this additional $1.5 billion to get the second adult, as well as $516 million to help fund additional certificated class teachers in the classroom. But again, that is not fully addressing what we see as the true implementation challenges related to implementing a program of this size. I'm going to turn back over to Erika.
Universal school meals. Well, we finally have crossed the border. As of right now, it is estimated that we have served over 1 million meals through the Universal School Meals Program. to students in schools. So congratulations to all of you. The governor's budget does provide increased, continued, ongoing Prop 98 funding, about 106.3 million for this year, and that will fully fund the Universal School Meals Program. And this money will be on top of what ended up being about a little over $1.8 billion that was provided in last year's budget. Other funding that is provided, he does continue to provide one-time funding for purchasing of specialized kitchen equipment and for training of your kitchen staff. And this is kind of in the hopes of increasing the ability of schools to provide freshly made meals at school sites. And then further, the governor does provide about $24.9 million in Prop 98 funding for the Farm to School initiative. And this is the initiative of the first partner to increase school gardens, to increase the ability of schools to get fresh produce straight from the farm into the school sites. And so that kind of covers the meal portion for at least the governor's proposed budget as of right now. Carlos, this is on to CTE now.
Thanks, Erika. So in the area of career technical education, there's three things that we wanted to bring to your attention. First, the proposal encourages the expansion of career pathways and dual enrollment programs by making these efforts as one of the 4 priority areas that will be used for the discretionary block grant funds. The second item is that the administration is also interested in streamlining the application for the TK through 12 career technical education categorical program. And they'll do this through the use of a single consolidated application. And then lastly, there's a $3 million appropriation that's intended to be made available to support the Cradle to Career data system. And I'll hand it back to Chris for the next slide. You're on mute, Chris.
Thank you. Apologize for that. As always, that does get in the way. So what a difference a year makes, as Patrick had talked about. You know, the early actions that were taken in the state budget in April of last year, as well as in the actual 2024 Budget Act, really helped to reduce the state's operational budget and also helped to alleviate the pressures on Prop 98. And so we saw, because of those prudent actions, that we were able to avert cuts to schools. And so we're actually, as opposed to, say, last year, we went back in time during this presentation, what we saw was possibly a reduction in Prop 98 over the 3-year period. We're actually seeing an increase in Prop 98 over the 3-year period. So that's very welcome news. And so the schools are largely going to be spared from those. And as Patrick talked about at the beginning, we are facing a number of unknowns, and I'm seeing some questions in the Q&A in relation to some of these as it relates to the natural disasters that we're seeing, and the wildfires that we're seeing down in the LA area. Those are significant factors in terms of what we will see in the budget. Of course, we are waiting to see what type of proposals come out of the incoming federal administration and what impact that will have on federal funding for a variety of programs, from universal school meals to special education to mental health and healthcare programs for students, as well as just the volatile nature of our state's revenue system. So those are things that we are continuing to monitor and we're watching very closely. But as for now, we are relatively pleased to see a budget that is sparing public education and is fully funding Prop 98 for the most part. And so this gets into our advocacy portion. And so I just want to really highlight, I know many of you who have enrolled and are watching this webinar right now have been involved in our Legislative Action Week. I want to say thank you very much for those who have done that in the past and want to keep that up. So this year's Legislative Action Week will be the second week in March 11th, Tuesday to the 13th, which is a Thursday. This will be virtual again. And so very much, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to be an advocate for your schools and for public education overall. This is a week where we hold court in the state legislature and focus on our main budget priorities and our legislative priorities for the year. And really, this Legislative Action Week in this advocacy time really helps change the narrative around the public policy conversation and the fiscal conversation in public education. So please do sign up and register. And if please, if you have any questions, just shoot us an email. We'll have a slide here in a little bit that has our email addresses, as well as you can always reach out to your regional PACER. And of course, we do have our Coast to Coast, our annual federal advocacy trip, which is going to be at the end of April. So Erika, Hoffman, and Patrick O'Donnell and Vernon and a number of others will be leading those efforts. And so that's always, we do this in coordination and co-sponsorship with the Association of California School Administrators. And so please do take interest and take note of that. We have information on our website and also to register for Coast to Coast that is up and available now. And then, of course, all this information will be available, of course, on our website. So if you need more information about our budget resources, please do check out that link there, and then do visit our website. We do update that website with everything and anything that we post in relation to the budget, either via emails, as well as information and summations of what we're seeing in the January budget.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Lastly, I'll say budget workshops were coming to a town near you. Please do register for that. These are regional workshops that we do in many of the county regional county offices of education. And so CSBA government relations staff will be traveling out into your neighborhood to help present on the budget. We'll go into greater detail. As you see, we co-sponsor this event with a number of our education advocacy partners. And it's really a great opportunity to dig into the nitty-gritty and the greater details in your local area. So, and then of course, like I said, we have our contact list. This is our government relations team. You see here and our email addresses. So you will get a copy of, again, the slide deck. And so you'll be able to see those emails when you get the copy of that. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Troy for our thank you and Q&A.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all our panelists for that great analysis of the budget. We'll now get to the members' questions. The first question we involves the $1.6 billion figure. It's just a point of clarification. The member is asking whether the limit to spend the $1.6 billion will be in the cycle of 2025-26.
So the answer to that is it's a good question. And the answer is that it is being, if you will, held back in the current year. So this is money that would otherwise come out to districts through their apportionment in Prop 90 through Prop 98 funds. What this does, though, is it kind of withholds that 1.6 billion that will be done through kind of a truing up or a settle up of the budget, if you will. And so this is what causes us some concern. This is a potential manipulation of how Prop 9, the formula that guides Prop 98 works. And so this is what causes us concern, is that that's $1.6 billion that will not go out the door in the current year. It will go out for purposes of this year's cost, but not potentially until 2026, summer of 2026, when you do the settle up, which is called the certification of Prop 98. So there's a good question. It's astute because it does speak to the issue that this 1.6 billion will not be seen potentially or realized until about a year and a half from now.
Thank you, Chris. The next question concerns the reserve cap. Those who have been board members for a while will remember that CSBA really championed this issue and carried the fight, but that was probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And we have a new board member who's asking whether you can describe the local cap not being triggered in more detail. You should probably provide some context about how that cap came into being for those who weren't around back then.
Sure. And this was, again, a multi-year campaign led by CSBA to push back against the governor. It was then Governor Brown had instituted a local reserve cap of 2%. So many districts were having a 10, 20, 30% reserve built up over years to prepare for a rainy day. We're being forced to pay down that reserve to 2%. And so as a result, that created a lot of fiscal and financial pressures on school districts, and CSBA embarked on a multi-year political and policy and fiscal campaign against the state and prevailed. And so what we saw was concessions made by Governor Brown that were enshrined in Proposition 2, which was passed in 2014, I believe. I'll have to double check that number. Don't quote me on that one. But it was enshrined in Proposition 2, which allowed a much more flexible reserve cap that was tied to how the reserve cap exists at the state level. So in terms of the question, the local reserve cap is only triggered, and the reserve cap would be 10% of unallocated funds or untargeted funds, and would not, and then of course it would not apply to basic aid districts or community funded districts or small school districts. So small school districts, again, defined as a school district of 2,500 students or less. And so in cases where the state has met or maxed, if you will, the Prop 98 reserve, which is 3% of Prop 98, then that would trigger that local reserve cap. So we rarely actually see the local reserve cap triggered. We did see it triggered in the years soon after the pandemic because the state was putting quite a bit of money into its Prop 98 reserve, and because of that, they reached the cap, and then it triggered that local 10% reserve cap. We are not seeing that now because we spent down use a good proportion, or actually all of the reserve in the prior year, and are just starting to rebuild the Prop 98 reserve at the moment. And so for the time being, the local reserve cap is not triggered.
Thank you. We had several questions in the Q&A about REBG, and Carlos was nice enough to answer some of those directly to the person who asked them. But we have one more remaining question, at least, related to LREBG. And that says, will the new LREBG be subject to the Carla J decision as well? Will it need to be in the LCAP and targeted a certain way?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good one. Again, we don't have the specific language of this proposal. That's something that we'll have to wait and see when the budget proposed language comes out in early February. The Kayla J case, what its effect did is it in that case, California agreed to dedicate at least $2 billion to help students catch up from COVID-related learning loss. And the states at that time agreed to shift money from the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant Fund to support local programs to increase student outcomes. So we'll have to take a closer look to see whether if that decision applies going forward to these funds that are going to be added to the program under the governor's proposed budget. And once we have access to that trailer bill language, we'll have a better idea as to whether that case impacts those funds in any way.
Appreciate it, Carlos. The next question revolves around the fires that we've been experiencing recently. My understanding is that fire areas don't have to pay their estimated tax payments for 2024, January, and 2025, April, June, September, until October 25. Is this related to the state wanting to hold funds back from Prop 98?
So that's a good question. Again, the details are going to matter here, so it would be premature for us to comment entirely because we haven't seen the trail bill language as of yet. But here's what I'll say in relation to here's what we know. We know that the governor has issued an executive order delaying the collection of income taxes or filing of income taxes in LA County until October 15th of this year. So as you might recall, this was similar to what the rest of the state received in 2023 when we saw, because of the severe winter storms, in California, we saw the delaying of the filing of personal income taxes receipts till October 15th and again until November 15th, 2023. So that really did impact the state's budget at the time. This is a much more, if you will, proportional impact in terms of the state's revenues, and so it only applies to LA County at the moment. And so, but LA County obviously is by populace is the largest county in California. So, but the income taxes collection has been delayed till October 15th. Now, is that having impact on why the governor was proposing? That's all speculation. It's not something that, it'd be not accurate for me to comment on that, but we do know that tax collections have been delayed in LA County. Additionally, just now hot off the press, the governor has announced a press release announcing the proposal to allocate $1.5 billion immediately to help with recovery efforts, cleanup efforts, and help to reopen schools that either have burned down or were shuttered because of the wildfires. So that is hot off the press. We don't have the details in terms of how the money is being allocated, but there are additional efforts being made at all levels of state government as far as we're observing and watching, and of course involved with CSBA to assist and help with the recovery from the LA fires.
For continuity purposes, I'll try and hit a couple other questions related to the fire right now. The next question touches on county education resources in LA, so I'm not sure that we're positioned to answer it in its entirety, but we'll do the best we can. The question says, with the devastating fires in Altadena and Palisades, do we foresee that, unlike in other years, LA County education resources will be tapped to support those school districts that are the most greatly impacted? And if so, how might those of us be affected that are not directly impacted by the wildfires?
So, much like Troy had said, we can't speak directly to what the Los Angeles County Office of Education resources and how those allocations will be made and prioritized by LA County and the superintendent and the county board. But what we do anticipate is that the legislature and the governor are currently in conversations in terms of potentially providing additional dollars, additional supports. There has been, of course, a state of emergency issued by the governor, which has actually streamlined the process to address issues from lost ADA to impacts of students missing school and so forth, and making sure that districts are held whole, if you will, harmless, if you will, because of the lost attendance. And so it is too soon to tell at the moment right now. Right, we are only 4 to 5 days into these since the declarations were declared. There are still active fires ongoing in LA County right now, and so once hopefully the fires are controlled and put out very soon, we will begin the process of really having conversations with the legislature and the governor as to what additional services and supports are needed. And I will take this opportunity to highlight what we had provided, and Troy, you can expand on this further, but we did send out an email earlier this week with greater resources for our schools that are impacted by the wildfires in terms of what is available now from state resources, executive orders, and additional lessons learned from past natural disasters.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, as Chris said, we do have a wildfire resources page, a dedicated page on the CSBA website at csba.org. I know many organizations are doing the same. I've been in contact with my counterpart at LACO, the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and they have an excellent website with a lot of resources that I would recommend for people in that area as well. I know they're very engaged in this issue. So while we don't know exactly what form all the help will take at this time, you can be assured that everybody is focused on this issue right now. And then lastly, I think this question will fall under the umbrella of the one you just answered, Chris, so don't go anywhere yet. Do we know the amount and or percentage of taxes from LA County which will be delayed?
We do not. So, I mean, obviously, LA County being, again, the largest county in the state, it will have a significant impact on what the state is able to collect come, tax filing time in April 15th. And it will create a scenario with the May revise that we will see and come May 15th that we will not have a clear picture of what our state revenues are. And so, it will have an impact. To what extent and an amount it varies and it depends because it's based upon income levels, capital gains, corporate taxes, and a number of things. And so the emergency orders, executive orders will impact that. And I just want to say I erred in saying the governor did announce 2.5 billion, not 1.5 billion, 2.5 billion to accelerate recovery from the LA fires. More details to come.
Thanks, Chris. And we'll continue to update you on this issue and to provide more resources. We're working on providing more information. We're organizing a webinar on the topic of the wildfire. All those measures are in progress, and it's going to be continue to be an area of emphasis for us. Now we're going to shift gears to transitional kindergarten. We had quite a few questions about that. The first question asks, is there money for implementation of transitional kindergarten in community-funded districts?
Unfortunately, you're not going to like the answer I have. And unfortunately, the answer is no. So this is something that we have been advocating for years. This is something that, of course, has not been included in the budget and continues to be an area of great concern as it relates to the mandate itself. And so, unfortunately, there is no additional dollars proposed in the budget or currently in the current year budget to help offset the cost of TK implementation for our community-funded districts.
Another TK question. I think this question is predicated on the drop in the teacher-student ratio from 12-1 to 10-1. And the question asks, will there still be the ability to have 24 TK students in a classroom, or will that drop to 20?
That will drop to 20. So again, it's only for the TK classroom, not a kindergarten classroom. So again, we're reaching full implementations. Again, this is the 4th year of the rollout, and so this now addresses all 4-year-olds who are eligible to enroll in TK. So all TK classrooms have to be a 1-to-10 ratio, and there's additional dollars in the budget proposed to help recruit additional teachers. But of course, that doesn't address what we know are the immediate concerns, immediate implementation challenges that are facing districts today, right, where we don't have the requisite amount of facilities funding to help provide for the unique needs of these young children. Also, in terms of trying to find the teachers who are properly credentialed and so forth.
Again, on the student-teacher ratio, has the TK 10-1 ratio amount per TK ADA been calculated so we can project our LCFF revenues?
That is something that we'll have to get back to you on in terms of the apportionment. It's also going to depend on what your enrollment looks like too. So it's a case-by-case basis by district, but that will be something that we will have. And you can email me directly to whoever asks the question, and I'm happy to help find the answer.
Next, the question is, for UTK, is there a distinction between the $1.5 billion to lower ratios and $516 million to provide additional adults in class? Seems like it is the same targeted outcome.
It does seem that way, but that is different. So, and it depends on the district. But here's you can, and I'll kind of nerd out a little bit. The governing code for TK is all in the 48,000 section 48,000 of education code. You can find it in there. But what I'll say is they are different. So how the code reads, it says that you have to have 2 adults in a TK classroom. The lead adult has to be a certificated teacher. So this is a tacit, I read this to be a tacit recognition that, we continue to face challenges in recruiting and retaining a qualified workforce to help serve these young students. And so this is why I believe we were seeing that. Now, again, that's my quick and dirty analysis. But yes, those are 2 different pots of funding to address what is essentially the same issue. But again, the second person in the classroom has to be an adult. It doesn't necessarily have to be a credentialed teacher.
Thanks. And a little variation on the previous question related to the student-teacher ratio. I just want to be sure we're not missing any nuance. Will the new TK be maximum class size 20 with 2 adults, meaning 10-1? Or can we have 3 adults in a class size of 24, 1 teacher and 2 aides for an 8-1 class size ratio, which would be below the 10-1 threshold? So essentially,
I
can
would
you
have
put
to.
more adults to keep your ratio low?
So this is something that we will have to inquire of the Department of Education. Right now, the guidance is it's a 1-to-10 ratio in a classroom, and so the adult to student ratio. Of course, it depends on your class size too, in terms of what your allowable size is in the classroom itself, right? So certain classrooms are smaller, some are bigger. So it depends on a case-by-case basis in terms of the room size too. So again, you can email me and we'll work on getting you an answer.
Okay. We have another quote, more of a comment from someone who says they have been told, I'm not sure by whom, that they would be able to have the TK classes with 24 kids and 3 adults and the 8-1 ratio. So that's something that, like Chris said, we will have to investigate further. That same person asks, how will the dollars for additional TK staff be allocated? I guess they're asking, is that a local decision or are there some restraints that the state is putting in place in terms of how those monies could be spent?
Are we, so so just to clarify, referring to the $900 million to reflect the increased enrollment?
I
Or the
believe so. It
teacher
doesn't
dollars? If it's the
clarify in the
900 million.
question.
So let's assume that that the question is referring to the $900 million. It is based upon enrollment. So it is similar. It is based upon what your ADA will reflect for the students who have walked in your door to enroll into TK.
And we had another 4 or 5 questions on that same ratio issue. I think we've exhausted that. So we'll move on to some of the other questions. Can you please highlight which of these funding streams, I believe they're referring to the budget as a whole, would actually help basic aid districts? So I guess, are basic aid districts eligible to, or are they receiving any of these funding streams that you highlighted in your presentation?
Yes, so TK. I apologize. I've been answering so many questions about TK, and I'm just saying TK over and over. So I'll say in terms of basic aid, yes, there are certain programs that the districts are available to draw upon. It will depend case by case in what we see in relation to the trailer bill. So I'd be remiss if I went further into specifying which programs, but what I'll say is it depends on what the language is in the budget in the trailer bill that we see. So we will make sure to provide clarity if and when we see that language in the trailer bill that will be hopefully released February 1st.
Okay, new topic for the $150 million for specialized kitchen equipment. Is that for both LCFF and basic districts?
Okay, let me get my picture on. It's not behaving. There we go. It's not specified the language at this point in time. So that is something we'll have to check when budget language actually does come out. Because as of right now, it's very broad language that just says he's going to be providing $150 million for this. But we will definitely check that and make sure it's in our follow-up once we actually see budget bill language.
Thanks, Erica. Carlos, you're up for the next question. Since there doesn't seem to be funding for ethnic studies, will that funding have to come from our individual district general funding? Will this mean that some districts could opt out of the ethnic studies due to lack of money?
Well, the way the language is written in current law, the reference to appropriation is a reference to an appropriation at the state level. So it's not specific to districts in terms of it meeting that requirement for an appropriation. That's not to say that there are still going to be potentially some costs that districts will bear short of the state providing a support in order to offer those classes, or later when it's specified in statute that it would be required as a graduation requirement. So we'll continue to monitor that and advocate for an appropriate runway prior to when districts would have to offer that class to their students.
Thanks, Carlos. The next question concerns special ed, so I'll be directing this to you, Erika. When will CSBA lead the charge in encouraging the federal government to fund SPED fully, or at least at 20%? This makes it especially hard for smaller districts to provide the best services for our students. Before I hand off to Erika, I will say we are leading the charge. We have been leading the charge. We have not gotten this relief, but it's certainly not for lack of trying, and Erika will provide the details about that.
Thank you, Troy, and we will continue to fully push to have the feds live up to their 40% promise. I'd appreciate it if they actually lived up to 20% of the 40%. I mean, it's one of those issues that we've been pushing for a long time. We have been able over the last couple of years, there have been like percentage point increments, and it really doesn't, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily make a large impact when you consider that, yes, you've gotten small increases in funding, but those increases have barely covered any sort of impact for just the number of new kids you have coming into special education. But a couple of years ago, we were able to get into the budget due to a bill that Congressman DeSaulnier, who's out of Contra Costa, Alameda County, put forward. And we did it more as a discussion point and made it part of the budget discussions to specifically get funding for the preschool programs for special ed and for the little kids, because that's always been an issue. I mean, you get kids as a school district, you get these kids at 3 years of age. There was never any funding specifically really provided for kids at that age. So we've started to get some of that funding. We are working with coalitions, both nationally here in California. Hopefully Mr. Hoffman will be reintroducing his bill to fund special ed at the 40% promise, and we will be supporting that as we have every year that he's introduced that legislation. This will be part of our push at Coast to Coast, as we've included this for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's something that we will always push for. And it's something we have continued to push for. And even on a national scale, it's being pushed by school districts, other school board members in other states, by CTA or NEA, their national affiliate. I mean, we all step forward and push for this. You know, part of the issue is it's a lot of money we're talking about, and they seem to find other uses and other ways to do it. This will be a big fight this year, you know, in just getting education funded, and hopefully we can at least continue the small increases. As I said, it doesn't cover your costs, but we are at least trying to get some level of increased funding. So please, it is an issue. A couple times a year, we'll be sending out action alerts to you to contact your members of Congress, especially when it comes to supporting legislation to fully fund special education. So keep looking for those, and we'll be sending those out as soon as we have a bill that we can tie it all to.
Thank you, Erika. We have a couple ELOP questions up next. The first asks, is there any flexibility on the use of ELOP during the school day for rural schools with difficulty covering after-school bus routes?
So this was a challenging issue when we saw language included in the trailer bill that required districts to provide transportation from one school site to the other where the ELOP program is operating. So very sympathetic to that, and it's something that we are monitoring and have advocated for. Unfortunately, we don't see that notated in any of the summation documents that were issued by or presented by the governor's office and the Department of Finance. So again, I'd hate to be kind of a little bit of a broken record here, but it does depend on what the devils are in the details. And so we will see those details when the trailer bills are announced on February 1st. And so I know that there has been no additional dollars provided for transportation within ELOP in prior year budgets. We also know that as you expand the program to more students, that you're starting to spread the money out, right, over a greater population of children. And so, this does continue to raise issues. And also this is why I highlighted that, ELOP is a program that many districts are using and taking advantage of, but it is a very significant allocation of ongoing Prop 98 dollars.
The next ELOP question asks, as far as additional ELOP funds go, do you know if we will be funded the full rate? Even though our average UPP is under 75%, we would be at 72% in 2025-26.
So that again is going to come down to the dollars and whatnot. We see those numbers reflected in the trailer bill. We know again, as you start to offer the program to more students, that sometimes the per pupil amount goes down, and then that requires the district to cover up the rest and backfill, if you will. So that is some area of concern in terms of the expanded requirements of ELOP, and with those dollars. Will those dollars be adequate? That is a fair question.
The next question, I believe this is for Carlos, is the $1 million streamlined curriculum adoption process a report?
It doesn't say explicitly in the summation that the governor released. Presumably, though, it wouldn't be a surprise if it is part of a report, which would include the recommendations.
Thank you. Given that our district has not regained our ADA from pre-pandemic, we will have significant budget reductions. I assume other districts have this issue as well, so the state is saving funds simply from the ADA reduction. I think the implicit question here is, since there are districts who are losing ADA, what is happening to the money that the state is presumably saving from that?
So this is a little bit of a complicated answer. I might ask my colleague Robert Manwaring to step in if he'd be so kind. But what I'll say is this declining enrollment is something that is plaguing many districts, especially urban and suburban districts up and down the coast, along coastlines as well. Prop 98 guarantee, although it somewhat can be driven by enrollment, is more so formula driven, and so the money continues to be a share of the state budget. So as enrollment declines, or ADA declines, if you will, it does increase the availability of Prop 98 dollars over time. And so it does, though that money stays within 98. So the money can be reallocated. So I'll turn it over to Rob to help answer more of the technical question on that piece.
So Chris is exactly right. So the Prop 98 sets the size of the pie, and then the legislature and governor decide how to allocate that pie. And so obviously the proposals that the whole CSBA team has been talking about today are about all the different slices of that pie that they're spreading out. So in this budget, the savings, like a lot of it's TK is to some extent offsetting the declines in enrollment that are happening. So you could see declines in other grades, and then you're adding the new cohort of TK kids. After we get past 25-26, we won't have any more new TK cohorts. We'll start to see a quite dramatic decline in attendance. And so I think this is a question for CSBA to think about over the long term, and you at the local level over the long term is, what are the priorities for reinvesting that money that's freed up from attendance declines? Because we know over the next decade, from starting in 26, 27, we're going to lose over 10% of our kids. It's about 680,000 kids over a decade. That's going to free up over $10 billion within Prop 98 for new stuff. So, in my other hat, I work for an organization called Children Now, and they've actually suggested reinvesting that money in the local control funding formula. But CSBA can try and help influence how those things are happening over a multi-year time period.
Thanks, Rob. And I would say, as a general principle, and Chris can expand on this, that Our preference and what we've been advocating for is that new monies be put toward the LCFF base, which allows locals the flexibility to make decisions about how that money can work best for the students in their community, as opposed to having those answers come on high from Sacramento, where people don't understand the unique needs in the diverse local school districts and county offices around the state.
I mean, exactly right. And one thing I'll add is, if that money, when that money does not go into LCFF base, it sometimes can result in the additional creation of categoricals, right? Additional, block grants or competitive grants that not all districts will realize. And so, the best place to put it is LCFF, and to avert trying to create new categorical programs or unfunded mandates.
Next question. Does this budget proposal impact the June deferrals? I heard that some of the planned surplus could be used to eliminate the deferrals.
It does. So again, welcome news. Good question. As you might recall, in the 2024 budget, deferrals were used as a tool to help lessen the impact on the ability of the state to pay for public education. And with the idea of paying those deferrals back over time, the uninspected increase in state revenues, again attributable to the volatile nature of our revenue income structure, but also in terms of the progressive tax structure we have, right, has resulted in some money coming in above budget estimates. And so that has allowed the state to be able to propose retiring the remaining amount of the deferral. And the numbers on our slide, I don't have the number come into memory. It's somewhere in the realm of $260 or $70 million, if I recall correctly. But the answer is yes, and so that is welcome news. That was something that we prioritized, obviously, in our budget advocacy as well.
Okay, we're going to try and get through all these questions, so I'm going to ask the panelists to be thorough yet concise, if you can thread that needle. Another question about special ed. What can be done about funding special ed equitably? We are getting killed. Costs are escalating $10 million a year. How can CSBA advocate to restructure so that districts are better funded for more intensive services? Erika, is there anything that you haven't already said on this issue that you want to add?
Not really. I mean, we have increased rates over the last number of years. We've got most districts up in the 95, 98% of funding on the state level. The problem with special ed funding, it is a federal mandate, and the feds aren't paying their portion. So if you look at a three-legged stool where everybody pays an equal share, that's one thing. Right now, locals are paying about 60%, the state's paying about 25%, and the feds, for their mandate, are paying 10 to 12%. There's where the problem lies. And we continue to push both the state and the federal. And it's just, and I know you guys are getting hit, and you're getting hit badly. And a lot of it is medical issues. And we're trying to get access to Medicaid and Medi-Cal funding. And that is slowly progressing. There will be hopefully some access provided coming up, at least for some Medi-Cal funding for some of the more medical services, not just for special ed kids, but for all kids, but especially that you'll be able to bill for special ed kids. So we are continuing to work on that. If you have any specific details and numbers, email me. At the end of this, there was my email on there. Please send them to me, because every time we can take those local numbers, both the Congress and the state, it does help. So thank you.
And so you heard Erika there. So the person who asked what districts can do to help with the SPED funding, a big part of that is anecdotes and data that indicate the impact of the Fed breaking their promise to fund special ed at that 40% level. And then there's also another question related to special ed, Erika. What can be done at the state level? I think Erika indicated that the state is more or less maxed out, but I don't know if you want to elaborate.
No, I mean, I think there's always the ability of the state to be able to provide more, the state to be able to provide, a larger amount of that. Unfortunately, we're all kind of dealing with a pot of money, and this goes to kind of how Prop 98 and LCFF both work. I mean, it's a percentage pot of money of the state general fund that gets divvied up. And unfortunately, if you're talking steady funding every single year, we got to take it from someplace else in education. So that's the conundrum we deal with at the state level. At the federal level, they just need to start paying the bill.
And don't go anywhere. We have another federal question. And you mentioned Medicaid, and someone asked that they said news came out about Medicaid being reduced at the federal level. Would that reduce monies available in the California state budget for education? Sort of a trickle down effect.
That's hard to say at this point because we haven't seen the language that's potentially being proposed by the House. I saw the issue myself. I mean, it's one of many things that the House is discussing in order to, you know, reduce the federal funding footprint. At this point, until we actually see language, I'm not sure what that's going to look like or how that's going to be, how or who that's going to affect. If they're talking retirees, if you're talking local health programs, if you're talking impact onto Medi-Cal, I mean, a lot of that's gonna take a lot of discussions and it's gonna need a lot of language to figure out what it is they're specifically talking about, because it could be split up in a number of ways. I mean, part of the problem we have both with the governor's proposed budget and also with what's going on at the federal level is there's nothing in writing yet for us to really look at and to dissect what it is they've actually proposed. But trust me, the minute some of this, you know, it all starts coming out in writing, we will be looking at it. We will be trying to dissect it and then provide the information back to you.
Thank you, Erika. Back to LREBG funds. This question, sort more of a statement, says that there are too many rules and requirements and that discretionary funding is preferred. Is there any potential of that happening in the future, or it is what it is in terms of LREBG funds and we should expect the status quo to continue?
Good question. I will refer back to what Chris said. Our preference is for flexible funding, preferably within the base grants. There's a long time between now and when the legislature is required to have an approved budget. So that is something that we'll continue to raise as this proposal is discussed within the legislature. So that is an issue that we do advocate regularly on.
Thanks, Carlos. Back to actually, Carlos, I'm going to call you back. The next question is on ethnic studies. Has the governor's office made any statements or indications related to appropriations for ethnic studies courses?
So the governor's budget staff did indicate that his intention is not to include an appropriation in this proposed budget. Obviously, things can change if the legislature has a different feeling on that. But at this point, there at least is a spoken position that the governor doesn't intend to include an appropriation in order to trigger those requirements in state law.
Yeah, thank you. The next question, will CSBA advocate at the state level to allow employees impacted by fires to have increased sick days that won't impact their allotted days and won't impact their CalSTRS? I assume the same would apply for CalPERS as well.
So it's a good question. That's all there. The big piece here is that the fires are ongoing at the moment. There have been a number of emergency executive orders issued by the governor. They have been far-reaching in terms of
I believe we might have lost Chris due to some technical difficulties, probably insufficient internet connection. So we'll keep moving on with our other panelists. Rural schools facing declining enrollment need support with maintaining core programs. You can only cut to the bone so far. A repurposing or flexibility of ELOP funding could solve this problem. Does anybody have any thoughts on the likelihood of that happening?
Why don't I jump in and take that, Troy, if that's okay? since Chris is kind of locked down. Those are conversations we're having because we understand the burden small school districts in particular have to providing, whether it be ELOP services or just services in general, right? They don't have the capacity, right? The revenue base to serve all the needs of their students. So again, those are conversations we're having. We would like there to be more flexibility with ELOP, and we have pushed it in the past, and we will push it going forward.
Thanks, Patrick. The next question on TK, is there money to implement TK in necessary small schools, or a change in the funding band model to support necessary small schools to implement TK? I think Chris is still struggling. Is anybody else
No,
able to hop in?
sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? I apologize. My
Yes.
internet just decided to take a dive. I apologize for that, everybody. So the question was additional
Is there
TK
money to
funding for
implement
necessary
TK?
small schools.
Yes.
So right now there is no the money being provided in through TK or the UTK rebenching of Prop 98, if you will, is going on a per ADA basis. So we will have to take a closer look at that. But as far as at the moment, there is no additional dollars being proposed for small schools or necessary small schools.
For ELOP, will districts
Well,
receive
actually,
an
real quick,
ELOP?
Rob, I think Rob,
Yeah.
did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, so there's two different funding streams, because this is through the local control funding formula that TK is funded. So there's two components of it. One is to fund the main TK program. I believe that for the necessary small schools, you would get that in lieu of the TK funding. However, you would get the funding for the smaller ratios, which flows out separately and is on an ADA count. So I believe that you would get that second stream, but not the first stream in a necessary small school situation. And presumably you're probably already at below those ratios. So I would expect that at least that portion of it you would receive.
Thank you, Rob. For ELOP, will districts receiving ELOP funds see an increase in funding if their unduplicated percentage stays the same?
So again, it comes down to what we'll see in the trailer bill language, again, because the devil's in the details there. It depends on if the allocation that is proposed in the January budget is adequate enough to cover the additional students, and or whether or not that will the amount of allocation or apportionment, if you will drop down because of the increased nature. Again, it as districts are required to offer TK and invite students, or sorry, TK ELOP, as more students are invited to enroll in ELOP, that of course then spreads out the money further. So it depends on the enrollment in the program, and then of course how the allocation amounts are going to be specified in trailer bill.
The next question, more of a statement, another person chiming in saying that they have been given guidance that you can have an 8-to-1 student teacher ratio in TK if you have the 3 adults. So there'd be 24 kids in class and an 8-to-1 ratio. We will continue to investigate that as we get clarification up here.
Well, I do actually, I've got news, and I want to give a shout out to my colleague and I committees over at LAUSD. They actually, LAUSD did ask that question. So what I'll preface it by saying is it does require some additional research and inquiries of the Department of Education, but in terms of what they got, that the Department of Education specified that there is no mandatory capital mass on this, that they're going to limit the classroom size to 20-to-1. So as of right now, it sounds that the guidance or the information that the department shares that you can have an 8-to-1 ratio for a classroom size of 24-to-1, as long as you're below the 10-to-1 ratio for TK. But again, I'll just share that is additional clarification that we've gotten at a staff level. That is not something that the Department of Education has issued formally in its guidance through its FAQ or under information on its website.
Okay, so we'll keep a lookout for that information and distribute it since it seems to be a pressing question. This is back to an earlier question. How will the $1.5 billion and the $500 million be assigned? Will every district get some of that funding, or will it be grant funded?
The $1.5 billion, are they referring to, I think it's unclear. I'm not quite sure what program grants they're referring to. So it's difficult for me or us to answer the question. Rob, do you have maybe read between the lines there?
Yeah, so I think they're talking about the transitional kindergarten again, and so the two numbers, the
Oh, the ratio, yes.
yeah, the 517 million, that is the current year, the 25-26 revised number. So it was a couple million less than that. Finance did a horrible job of describing it in the governor's release. So it's 516 million in the current year. In the budget year, that 516 million will go up to 1.5 billion, including serving the additional cohort of TK kids, as well as the incentive to go down to 10-1. I don't know if it's incentive because you have to do it. But yeah, so it's the 516 is the current year amount. The 1.5 billion is what it will be for 25-26.
I will fix that in the slide, and we will note that when you send out the updated slide deck.
We have a couple questions clarifying on ethnic studies, basically asking, do LEAs have to offer ethnic studies next year if the status quo where the funding isn't triggered holds?
Yeah, the requirements in statute only take effect if there's an appropriation. So, and those requirements are in three areas. The first one is that you offer a class, you have to offer a class by the 2025-26 school year, and that it becomes a graduation requirement in the 2029-30 school year, and that that there are LEAs must abide by guardrails in our existing law when developing their own ethnic studies course. So those three general areas do not take effect and will not take effect until there's an appropriation made by the state for the enactment of those provisions.
Okay. The next question, I don't think that we have the ability to answer at this point in time, but just to be sure, are any of the districts affected by the fire's basic aid? And is there any possibility that they would become state aid districts because of the fires?
I don't know that off the top of my head, and that would be something that would depend on a variety of factors. But perhaps Robert or Patrick might have some insight.
I think we can answer the first half of that question. Yes, there are some that are basic aid. I believe the Malibu district, as an example, would be a basic aid district. But whether that will change their status, I think would depend upon future property values and what happens with rebuilding and property taxes. And there's a whole lot of uncertain questions there that we just couldn't answer at this point in time.
Will every food provider be obligated to offer products fresh from farm to school? I'm not sure if this is drawing on the budget specifically or if it's just a point of interest. If no one has an immediate response, we can move on to the next question.
Troy, I would say that just briefly, they're not obligated to provide it, but they're, what the farm to school program is trying to do is to get schools and farms to start talking to each other. And also one of the big pieces too is getting farms into schools, as far as, having gardens at school sites and being able to have vegetables at school sites that can be used, that students grow, that families grow. There are a couple of school districts I know that have family programs that families come in and they work, a plot of land like a community garden. So that's kind of where it is, but there's not necessarily a mandate that they have to do it.
I think where this question might be coming from is there's, Robert F. Kennedy is potentially going to be in the cabinet and has talked about processed food, et cetera. The governor recently jumped on that topic too and said we need to do some things at schools. It's not clear what the governor wants to do. It's not clear what they want to do at the federal level. So I think it's to be determined on that topic.
Thank you both. Is there any progress on moving off of ADA-based funding to enrollment-based funding? We have to hire the staff and keep the facilities regardless of the day-to-day attendance.
I can take that one. I think at this point, there's been no movement. It has been a conversation for a number of years. Remember, too, there are folks out there that don't want to do that, right? But certainly we have pushed ahead in that direction. There is going to be a report out by the LAO pretty soon that speaks to how much and what it would cost to actually do that. It's probably about $4 billion or so, maybe a little bit north of that, to fund that effort. So it also boils down to dollars too, right? To head in that direction. But again, it's something this association has worked on and promoted in the past.
I see firsthand the challenges our district faces in maintaining and supporting the technology infrastructure required for modern education. These challenges include inadequate staffing levels and competitive pay to attract and retain skilled professionals. Can CSBA advocate for increased and targeted state funding to address these critical needs in technology? Or is this an area where districts are expected to allocate funds from broader allocations like LCFF? If it's the latter, how can CSBA support districts in prioritizing and justifying these investments?
Why don't I jump on that one, Troy? Yeah, I think it's already kind of been discussed. What we see as our mission is to provide you the money to add it to the LCFF base and then allow you to prioritize where those dollars would go. So when we push for more LCFF funding, not more categoricals that might not have anything to do with technology, et cetera. What we're really doing is trying to push more money into the base so the local boards can decide and prioritize those dollars that go to their LEA.
Thank you, Patrick. The next question just goes back to the TK student-teacher ratio and says they prefer to use that ongoing funding to support some of the other increasing costs, such as pensions, special education, et cetera. So we acknowledge that statement. And then the following statement, agree with previous comments around LREBG. Don't add another year of restricted funding, even if it is one time. Just add additional funding to the proposed new one-time discretionary to allow local control to districts to decide how best to address increasing costs. So yes, on both of those, that aligns with our funding priorities, which is give the maximum amount of flexibility to locals because you know best what your specific student needs are and how to address them. Then the next question, if an LEA does implement ethnic studies, will it be able to get the funding when available? Same question for early implementation of the financial literacy graduation requirements.
Yeah, there's not enough detail to know at this point. That's definitely something that we would advocate for. Typically, though, what we found in the past experience is that when the state does authorize funds, typically they're not enough to cover all of LEA's costs. So, but our advocacy will include, prioritizing those expenses that LEAs have already taken on to offer an ethnic studies course.
Okay. Thank you, Carlos. We were almost at the end. One final question, and then we're going to close down because we have gone over time. Are districts offering half-day TK along with full-day kindergarten at the same site, allowing for staff and facilities to serve more students while maintaining required student ratios?
Yes, there are districts that are serving, doing part day TK, part day kindergarten. There's also incentive to encouraging. The state does encourage districts to offer a full day kindergarten. However, yes, there are districts that do alternate so they can have in the morning TK classroom and an afternoon TK classroom, but it varies district by district in terms of resources, capacity, and staffing.
And then someone helpfully posted in the Q&A a link to an FAQ from the CDE. And that link, if you go to question number 15, has information about how schools can meet the 1 to 10 adult to student ratio requirement upon full implementation of TK. So that may address some of the questions that have been posed here. And with that, we have answered all of the questions, 62 of them, which is by far the most we've ever done in a single webinar. So congratulations to the panelists on running that sprint. And thank you to all our members who joined us today. Again, we will be sending out a recording of today's webinar along with the slide deck that our presenters used. Also, we urge you to search the Budget Resources page for more information. We have a bevy of resources there. If you just type CSBA Budget Resources into your web browser, that will be the first result. And look forward to more updates from us on the budget and other pressing issues related to public schools. Thanks for everybody who tuned in today, and thank you to our panelists. We will see you soon.